Hey everybody, Dutch Sense here. 3:30 Central Time on Tuesday, July 28th, 2015. And I've got you looking at Earthquake 3D here, and we're looking at the last 48 hours of earthquakes from the USGS, 2.5 and greater in the United States and territories, 4.0 and greater internationally. And just look at it, guys. We have a lot of earthquakes showing up here, this huge stack of earthquakes off the Aleutian Island chain near Cleveland Volcano. Also, a swarm of earthquakes in northwest Nevada at Bittner Butte, near Bittner Butte, dormant volcano, and a swarm of new 4.0 and greater earthquakes in the Midwest at the fracking operations in Oklahoma near the Kansas border. And that's starting to creep up. We're actually seeing larger earthquakes, the largest of which is a 4.5, almost equal to what we saw at the volcano here on the West Coast with the 4.7. Now, with the activity up here in Alaska, we also saw, in conjunction with that, within the same day, the past 24 hours here, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake strike here in Papua New Guinea in the West Pacific. And just get a look at that. That's a very large earthquake in the region. And overall, let me just go ahead and show you what's happened over the last 7 days since I did my last earthquake update 10 days ago. Now, 10 days ago, or 11 days ago, I warned you guys that we would be seeing 7.0 or greater earthquakes strike this week. And now it's begun over the last day, 2 days. We've seen two, well, at least a 6.9 that was downgraded, and one 7.0 here. So we've seen two over the last 7 days. And if you take into account the one that happened almost 9 days ago, that's three different 7.0 or greater earthquakes since I issued that warning to watch out for the building activity. And just look at the rest of the planet. Okay, this is really spread out now from the West Pacific across towards Europe, even going as far west as Portugal, Rock of Gibraltar, Strait of Gibraltar, 3.4. Very rare earthquake activity there. South America, it picked back up as well. We saw silencing off, if you will, for several weeks. I took a 2-week vacation. We only saw two 6.0 earthquakes in that time. And now look at it. So what does this all mean? Let's get into the earthquake forecast for the next 7 days. Now, as I'm talking here, another 3.4 earthquake just struck here in Oklahoma at the fracking operations, which, you know what, at this juncture, let's just go ahead and actually look up the largest earthquake here. Now, I haven't actually done this with this particular earthquake, so I don't really know what's right there. I can tell you this. All of the other earthquakes that we've looked up are directly at fracking operations. This one, let's just go find out. This is how you do it. You pull the coordinates from the USGS, put them in on Google Earth. Don't use the USGS service maps. They don't show you this kind of stuff. Lower resolution images, the whole bit from the USGS, and that's on their website. So here's the earthquake epicenter, and maybe, what is that, a few hundred feet away? Right across the farm field, here it is. Here's our pumping operation. This is just one. Here's another one across the road. And what they'll do is they'll inject water down into the earth, and then that will actually fracture the shale and release the gas. Unfortunately, when we have large pressure coming from the Pacific Northwest, it presses on these pumping operations where they've drilled out, and it actually causes large earthquakes, what I call a superfracture. And the superfracture causes other wells in the area to actually crack their casements. And then that releases water under pressure at a deep level, which then causes other earthquakes, like a domino effect. And once you get one superfracture, you see what's happening now, which is here in the Midwest, more larger earthquakes happen in succession of one another, back to back at different operations in the region as the area is shook up. So this means we need to watch over the next 7 days in these states, and we'll go ahead and name them out here along the edge of the North American craton. And if you're a longtime viewer of mine, you already know this. If you're a new viewer, let me explain. The mountain ranges extend in the Pacific Northwest down here through Colorado and further south all the way down through Texas. Let's turn these rings down so you can see it better. And then curls back up through Oklahoma, curls back down through Arkansas, goes down through the Smoky Mountains, and then back up the East Coast with the mountain ranges on the East Coast. And that's what's called the edge of the craton. The craton is the unsubducted portion of the plate that hasn't moved in a very long time. And what we're seeing happen is earthquakes develop along the edge of the plate as pressure builds up here in the Pacific Northwest, it pushes to the south and to the southeast. To the south, it causes earthquakes at dormant volcanoes, and to the southeast, it causes earthquakes at the fracking operations and the weak spots further up the east coast. So, over the next 7 days, what do we need to watch for? The states, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, right up here in the Yellowstone National Park region, going west into Idaho, which is associated with Yellowstone, with the underground magma chamber stretching all the way over into central Idaho, now confirmed. Further south, we need to watch in western Colorado, going south into central Colorado, right at the New Mexico border at the fracking operations there. Also, watch down here in Texas. It seems like they're not reporting the earthquakes. You can go check the charts, and you will see greater than 2.5 earthquakes on the charts. For some reason, they're not making it onto the USGS feeds. I don't know why. No conspiracy there yet. I just don't know why they're not reporting some of the earthquakes there. So we have to watch for those to return, and they should be big enough that the USGS can't just ignore them off the charts, and we'll see them actually on the feed, and then we'll see them here on Earthquake 3D, and you'll know about them on the USGS website. Up until then, you'll have to watch the charts yourself here at Yellowstone and south in Colorado and in Texas, because it seems like they're not reporting them to us, guys. And the reason being is, of course, they don't want us to draw attention to the large fracking operation in southern Colorado, in western Colorado, where the 3 people died, or at Yellowstone, where it causes panic. They'd rather just have you not know, in my opinion. So we need to watch these areas for earthquakes to return. Also, East Coast, you are now back in the mix for the next 7 days. Why is that? Well, first of all, we have all this West Coast movement showing. Secondly, the Midwest movement showing multiple 4.0 earthquakes over the last few days means that the edge of the craton to the north-northeast should now be displaced, and we should start to see multiple earthquakes, most likely swarms, develop in New England, going north into southeast Quebec. And let me zoom in here so you guys can see the area, or if you don't know what I'm talking about United States geography. We've got our New England area here, and then this goes up into Maine right here. We've got New Brunswick, Canada, Nova Scotia here, and then we've got southeast Quebec, Ontario, in this region here, going down to the Great Lakes. And you can see the edge of the plate as it fractures off and goes out here. You can follow that back down, and we should see earthquakes pop off up here. We should also possibly hear about some new rumbles, booms, mystery booms popping off on the East Coast. Every time we see this movement here on the western portion of the craton and the southern portion of the craton, then the eastern portion starts to hear rumbles, booms, small earthquakes, sometimes even moderate earthquakes that are comparable to what we see here. We've seen 4.0 earthquake activity pop off up here in southeast Quebec after we see earthquakes down here at the fracking operations. Also, I would like to point out, in 2011, we saw swarms of 4.0 earthquakes, upwards of 5.0 earthquakes, which then were followed by an earthquake on the East Coast in Virginia, that 5.9. In the same 24-hour period that struck Virginia, there was a 5.0 earthquake that struck the southern Colorado fracking operations. Same day. And the Colorado earthquake came before the Virginia earthquake. So when you start to see the craton moving from the west and the south, watch to the east for that follow-up movement. It should be smaller, but East Coast, have an earthquake plan ready. Be prepared. There are large earthquakes which strike the East Coast from time to time. As we saw with that upper 4, lower 5.0 earthquake that struck Michigan, caused damage in people's houses, knocked things off walls, scared people, of course. And you need to watch out for that in light of the other activity that's going on in the United States. West Coast, we need to watch. Let's just zoom in here again. We'll name it out one more time. The Gorda Escarpment going north to the axial seamount. Watch in this region here. That should be in the upper 4, lower 5.0 earthquake with swarm, or one single large event. Let's hope for the swarm. That's what's happened the past several times. So that means there's most likely some kind of undersea eruption happening at the cleft segment to axial seamount. That's most likely what's happening off the west coast. But regardless, there should be movement here in the northwest that catches everybody's attention. Also, far, far south, Salton Sea, let's just say San Diego, south to Salton Sea, possibly right across the border, that should pick back up again. Gulf of California, Baja California, Salton Sea, San Diego, Southern California should show movement in light of the other activity that's been going on. Dormant volcanoes, You'll start to see those pop off as well. When I say dormant volcanoes, you'll have to almost go back and watch my other videos to catch up on this. But let me just give you one example. See the 2.5 that struck here in eastern California. Okay, Cyril's Valley, California. Let's go ahead and look that up. And I'm just going to show you so you have an idea of what I'm talking about here when I talk about dormant volcanoes in California showing movement. These always show movement before larger events strike on the West Coast. People ask me, Dutch, is there going to be a large earthquake on the West Coast? I always tell them, you'll know from me at least a day ahead of time if I'm around, because there's always signs of movement that show before larger movement. And that's dormant volcanoes, fracking operations on the edge of the craton. All those show movement before large activity along the edge of the North American plate or on the West Coast. Okay, so here's our earthquake location, and we'll just let this load. And what do we have right here? We have Volcano Peak. Okay, here's our old lava flow. Actually, not old at all, really, if you really look at it and compare it. But we have old domes. You can see these are old craters here covered. And this is part of a large volcanic complex. Each one of these. What is this? Red Hill. Further to the east, you've got some over here. And further buttes to the east, let's just back this out. We have Volcano Butte here, and even more over here. And you can really make out the layered flows that have happened over time off of these different volcanoes. And these are small buttes. These are no shock to see along the edge of a fault zone, which you really know about the California fault zone structure. You know that it goes right through here, and we have all the volcanoes that have popped off over the ages, and we're talking about maybe possibly hundreds of volcanoes out here. None of them are marked. I mean, look down here. These are all volcanoes. I mean, each one of them. They go all throughout this entire region up through here. And again, that's no shock, but it is a shock to see earthquakes develop out at those locations before any larger movement happens. So once you start seeing that moderate 3.0 into 4.0 earthquake activity striking the dormant volcanoes, that's when you then watch for the larger movement down here to the south and also in the northwest. So it's a lot to keep your eye on in the United States, pretty much a watch for the whole country in certain areas. The craton edge is defined, again, with all those states, but there's only small portions in each state that really need to watch for that movement. Even if a large earthquake hits, it's only going to affect that region, maybe within a 50 to 100 mile region around here, because we're only talking in that 4.0 earthquake range that we need to watch for here along the edge of the plate. Further to the west coast, it gets larger, and that's when we really need to worry, based upon the other activity going on in the Pacific. Last 48 hours, those two large earthquakes, one deep earthquake in the asthenosphere. The higher these are off the planet, the deeper they are into the Earth. That's an earthquake 3D feature. So this enables us to see that there's at least one deep event, at least 200 to 300 miles deep, down here in the asthenosphere. The asthenosphere is the area of semi-melted magma, supposedly, below the plates, that when we see earthquakes in that region, it upwells, it pushes up, and it causes larger, shallow earthquakes to develop. And these are color-coded, so these are light peach pink, that's older, and white is younger. So we had the deep earthquake followed to the northwest by the shallow, larger earthquake. And that happens time after time after time. Now what do we need to watch for over the next 7 days? Pretty simple. The shallow earthquake is now going to displace, or has now displaced, the rest of this area, and that's going to follow up with another shallow earthquake that should happen over the next 7 days in the silent area, in the area that hasn't shown movement over the past 7 days. So you see the 7.0 here, you see the 6.9 here. We have a silent area in between that should normally show large movement. That area should move at a shallow level, at a larger magnitude, let's just say in that mid 6.0 range, and that puts us right down here to central Japan, going south along the Izu Ridge, going north to Kamchatka. It's pretty much a small area to nail down because of the size of the West Pacific. So when you're only looking in this region here for the next few days, that's actually good, but it's not good for the region that we're watching because it could get to be a larger earthquake. Just as I told you 11 days ago, we were going to see the 7.0 earthquake activity return. Well, over the next 7 days, this 7.0 activity is going to crest out just like it did last time. So you start to see it, guys. I hope you see the pattern if you're a long-time viewer, which is it started out with that 5.0 swarm activity 12, 15 days ago, 2 weeks ago, let's say. Then 10 to 11 days ago, I made my earthquake update, first one I had made in 2 to 3 weeks since I'd been on vacation. Came back, said, hey, look, we're starting to see this build up. There's only been one 6.0 earthquake in the past 2 weeks, I said. And I said, now we're going to see that ramp up because look at this. Look at these swarms. This means next week we're going to see the 7.0 earthquakes return. And they did. Here they are on the screen in front of you, which means over the next 7 days, this is going to crest out just like the last time. So it should go up just a little bit. So we should see at least one more larger earthquake, and that should then top us out, unless we see deeper earthquakes again. If we see more deep earthquakes develop here in the asthenosphere, I'm going to have to issue another update to update you guys on what to watch for. Right now, there's just one over the last 48 hours. And over the last week, really, we only have 2 to 3 new deep earthquakes. So, over the last 7 days, of course, there's been a few, but really just 2. And when you look at that, you've got, of course, 3 up here, but really just 2 sides on either side of the Pacific. Those are the areas that showed any movement. Nothing deep over here on the east. Like we saw previously, guys, you may remember down in Brazil, the deep movement happening near Argentina, that ceased. So did the volcanic eruptions. You may remember Villarrica, all the other volcanoes that erupt all the way throughout the entire Central and South America continent. Those areas have now stopped erupting. Instead, it's now transferred all the way over here to the West Pacific, where we're seeing 5 volcanoes erupt in Indonesia currently, all in let's just say 1 day's time. 5 volcanoes erupted just a few days ago, and they had to shut down air traffic in the entire region due to that activity. That's right where all of these earthquakes are happening. Indonesia, right in here where my mouse is. And let's just go ahead and turn down the ring so you can see those. Okay, so Indonesia right in here, and there's 5 volcanoes erupting throughout Indonesia and Philippines. Well, that's no shock. Why? Well, the deep movement is causing upwelling, which is not only causing shallow earthquakes, but it's causing multiple volcanic eruptions. Here in the West Pacific, watch Japan, watch for new deep earthquakes to develop, and now that this shallow movements happen, the adjacent areas really do need to be on watch. This puts us as far west as western Sumatra. So this small area here, well, let me bring it over and show you a little bit better. We'll go ahead and zoom in. This small area here, let's just put our mouse right over it. Watch in this region for at least that mid 5.0, possibly upwards of a mid 6.0 earthquake to strike in Sumatra. Also to the east, this makes sense to me that either area on either side will move over the next 7 days, and it will be at least a magnitude lower than this large earthquake. Unlike our deep earthquakes, which cause larger earthquakes to develop off the movement that happens below, these shallow earthquakes displace the areas laterally. So it should be smaller movement, but it should settle out over both areas to the east, west, north. Australia should remain high and dry, and then you'll see earthquakes pop off down here to the south. Again, we're going to talk about pressure transfer over a large distance, and it will literally skip right over most of Australia. That's why most of these Australian earthquakes either happen to the center or south portion of Australia, right down here, because you can imagine the pressure pressing down from the north. It goes right along the edge of the plate, and it breaks right at the weak point, right where it's meeting the other plate as the pressure wants to transfer in the direction it's pushed. And sometimes it's pressed to the northeast, sometimes it's pressed to the northwest, sometimes it's pressed to the southwest, and sometimes it's pressed to the southeast, depending on which direction the earthquake pressure is coming from. And there is a direction and a flow to the earthquakes. I know they don't say there is. They say there's no correlation between earthquakes across the globe. There is. And not only is there a correlation between earthquakes across the globe over a long period of time, but it happens back to back sometimes, over thousands of miles. From the northwest United States to the southeast, you could see an earthquake pop off here along the west coast, and within an hour or 2 hours, you might see a large earthquake pop off here in the Midwest, or you might see an earthquake pop off in Colorado, and within 12 hours, an earthquake pops off on the East Coast. Again, thousands of miles apart. And then multiple thousands of miles apart when you see an earthquake pop off here in the West Pacific, and then it causes an earthquake to develop here on the west coast of the United States. So overall, next 7 days, keep watch. And again, down here in the South American portion, we haven't seen any deep movement. So we need to watch for deep movement to develop. That will then dictate out where we need to see shallow, larger movement. We shouldn't see a shallow, larger earthquake until we see a deeper earthquake. So keep watch. As soon as you see the deep earthquake, that will then let us know which area down here is going to be moving on a hefty basis over the next 7 days. And it's got to happen. The entire West Pacific has moved. Again, the areas we're watching are here and here in the West Pacific. I mean, it's pretty much every week now we're watching there since the uptick has began in 2011. So it should be no shock to my viewers which areas we're watching, especially based upon the movement that we're already seeing. So we have something to base it upon. It's not just keep watching these areas, because there was 3 weeks there was nothing. Luckily, that was the 3 weeks I was on vacation, so I didn't have much to do. But it's ironic, the day that I came back is when that first 7.0 hit. It's really weird. But down here in South America, I would guess that if there's going to be a deep earthquake, it's going to happen back where all the others have happened, which would be at the Chile-Argentina border region along the Andes Mountains. And that will then dictate where it's going to happen. But again, if it doesn't happen, then we won't have a large earthquake over the next 7 days down here in South America. Central America, I'd like to point out, let's just go ahead and show you guys the last 7 days of activity. There's a cluster spot, and now Colima volcano has been erupting almost every day for the last several weeks. Steadily, lava flows, large blasts, not many people talking about it, but that's relieving the pressure for Mexico. There haven't been any large earthquakes in Mexico since those volcanoes started steadily erupting. Have you noticed that? There were all those large earthquakes in Mexico, 7.0, upper 7.0, over 2011, 2012, 2013. Then the volcanoes started to go. And now, no earthquakes because the volcanoes release that pressure buildup underneath the plate that I'm talking about here coming from the West Pacific. But further to the south, further to the south now, there haven't been any new eruptions. So we're starting to see new pressure build. And that means then the area in between the two cluster spots, so you have a little bend here, right, just south of Panama, north of Ecuador, and these are the Galapagos here. Okay, that erupted, 2 months ago with Wolf Volcano. Nothing since. Unexpected blast at Wolf Volcano. This means we need to watch for an earthquake to develop. Coast of Nicaragua, maybe? El Salvador? Somewhere right north of Panama, somewhere in between these two cluster spots. Could take us as far south as Colombia, but I'm leaning more towards the Central American portion, right in here. And that would be in the 5.7 to 6.3-ish range, right below that 6.0 range. Why am I coming to that term? Why am I coming to that conclusion? Well, look at all the 5s to the south. Okay, we've got multiple 5.0 earthquakes to the south. We have a cluster of 4s to the north. North America has moved fully. Volcano eruptions happening here, which means this area has got to be under some tremendous pressure. And since it hasn't shown any earthquake activity over the last 7 or over the previous 7 before that, we've got to see some kind of large movement strike here. Central America going into South America over the next 7 days. Have an earthquake plan ready if you live in South America along the coast. We're more leaning towards coastal movement than that central plate movement like we saw in Colombia in 2011 with those 7.0 earthquakes that struck central Colombia. More to the west of central Colombia, right along the shores. Keep watch there. All right, now let's get into Asia and Europe and the far West Pacific, which takes us just beyond the area we're watching at the stick point here west of Indonesia, takes us north to the border of India. Look at all the activity that developed compared to what we were watching for, guys, and each area got hit just as expected, with swarms no less, right in the areas warned. You can see them here, 4.7s, 4.0s, 5.0s, struck all throughout the region. The only area that didn't get hit directly was Kathmandu, ironically. So the whole area around is still adjusting out from that large movement that happened several months ago, killing all those people in Kathmandu. What do we need to watch for over the next 7 days? Well, let's look at the last 48 hours. See anything? Absolutely nothing. So we've got our stick point down here to the south. This is a repeat of last 7 days forecast, which right along the border of India. Now we can nix out Kathmandu since it's already moved. So the area just to the east, let's say East India, south to the ocean. So right in here, and then far western India, going into Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, right in this region, just west of India. And it's a small area. Again, each area, I'm trying to get it down to a small spot that we watch for that large movement. I don't want to put the whole region on watch because we're talking about vast areas that won't feel anything, even if there is a large earthquake. You can just talk to the people over here that felt the 7.8 versus the people that didn't. Okay, there were some just 200 miles away that barely felt any shaking. Others 200 miles away in a different direction were totally destroyed. So it all depends on where you are when these earthquakes strike. Nailing it down to the region is the hard part, and the time frame, based upon the other activity that's happening in adjacent areas. So let's back this out. You can see heavy movement down here to the southeast of the silent area. Almost pointing, reaching out, one after the other, stepping over towards the area where we're watching down here to the south. And then it steps up because there's no way for it to transfer across. When there's no weak spot. It's going to follow the path of least resistance, the pressure. So the pressure is going to come across here, hit here, transfer straight up north, cause earthquakes right in here. And then it'll transfer west. Again, follow that point right along the Himalayan mountains, and that's where our earthquakes will strike. They go further west, and then you can see where they meet Afghanistan, Turkmenistan. Normally, we see this then fan out across the Caspian Sea with earthquakes here west of the Caspian Sea, going west towards Greece, where there's another sticking point, another cluster spot, which is a fracture spot that causes volcanic eruptions, large earthquakes. Greece is known for this. Southern Italy, going all the way south, even into North Africa. This whole region here is normally earthquake prone. Everybody knows that, but the reason it is because the pressure that everybody thought was coming from the Atlantic is actually coming from all the way over here, and it transfers like a Rube Goldberg or a set of dominoes falling all the way across over to here. You can almost see it. If you wouldn't imagine these were eroded by water, you can almost see which way the pressure flows. Like a flowing river, you can see this fanning out across the entire region. And we could even jump over to Google Earth so you can see it in a better way. Let me go ahead and turn off my place marks. We can even get into the North American craton this way if you really wanted to. But let's just back this out and bring this due north. Okay, so here we go. You can see, now let's turn off the borders and labels. Okay, here we are in the West Pacific. Now we have all our plate structures, and we get right over to the region that I'm talking about here, and then you can literally follow it with your eyes. Okay, and it comes over here. Look at this. You can really see the structure and how it's pressed, and it's proved that even rock technically flows like water over time, and you'll get these formations that happen spreading out over time as these areas fan out with erosion, even with mass weight distribution. You can see a deformation happen over large areas, again based upon the plate structure, so that you can follow this through into Europe. And then we get over here to Europe, and this kind of helps give away the areas to watch in Europe as well. So when we say, you know, Europe, you guys are due for an earthquake here at the English Channel, well, if we zoom in on the English Channel, you can even make it out here on Google Earth, the undersea fault zones. Okay, you see these lines here. Those aren't just there by chance. Those are undersea faults, and that's where the earthquakes are striking. Why? When the pressure is coming up from the south, let's get back over here to Earthquake 3D. In Europe, when the pressure is coming from the Pacific, again, from over here, it transfers over here, it reaches this point, there's then a sticking spot. You normally don't see many earthquakes develop out in this region. Maybe up through Italy, some smaller earthquakes, and then it releases at the weak spots. Sometimes that's northern Italy. Okay, so we saw in 2011, 2012, 6.0 earthquakes that struck that killed people. Sometimes it's at the fracking operations in France, Germany, and Poland. Okay, and other times it happens at the fault zone right here going north into South England. Okay, so you can just follow these And you can even make it out over here on the East England side where your fault zones travel through on the island of England, or the country of England. Sorry, guys. So, overall, where do we watch? Well, because the cluster spot is terminated down here in Greece, this actually takes us back to North Italy. So it's building up here, it's releasing here. Eventually, this will backfill to the point where we see North Italy again going north towards Switzerland to start showing swarm activity. Let's hope it stays small. Watch out, because the actual pressure coming from the Pacific is fairly strong right now, and it's really quiet right now. So we should first see movement here. It's going to transfer over just like you would expect. So first we'll see movement. It'll start here. It'll transfer over here. You might see it bounce back and forth like a game of Frogger, and then it'll go further to the west where you'll eventually see your earthquake transpire here in North Italy. Once you get to England, this gets a little tricky right now because, again, there hasn't been any activity there in several weeks' time now. So what has it been? 2 weeks, 3 weeks since we've seen any earthquake activity there. If there were to be any sizable movement, it would most likely strike now along the north shores of France. So right along the shores of France, again going right out here to this split, and if we do see any activity, it should just be in that 3.0 range. So nothing that'll catch anybody too off guard. You most likely won't even hear about it. I'll have to tell you about it, or you'll have to check the feeds for the EMSC, because the USGS won't even report on those smaller earthquakes that happen internationally. So we'll keep watch there just in case for smaller movement, but I'm leaning towards larger movement, again, North Italy. All right? Further south, Strait of Gibraltar. You know, we see an earthquake strike there, 3.4, striking South Portugal. That's fairly rare, okay? We don't normally see many earthquakes strike in Portugal. But what is Portugal related to? Well, we've got the Canary Islands, and we've got the Azores over here to the west. So 2 sets of volcanic islands, again, to the west and southwest of this location. Is it related to volcanism? I don't know. There's no volcano at the region. I already went and looked. But it could possibly be related to that plate tectonic pressure coming from the west, and it's popping off here, again, because this would be our fault zone that stems west from the plate, and instead of going down all the way to the volcanoes and causing an earthquake down there, it then causes an earthquake right at the termination point. That's the point where the pressure releases. Luckily, it's in a 3.4 range. But that's kind of like what we would expect up here as well over the next 7 days. So that kind of makes sense to me to see that 3.4 there. There should be in that mid 3.0 range also further to the north. It seems like it's been really quiet in Iceland going north to the North Pole. Not giving a forecast for it. I'm just letting you guys know. Really got quiet up there. It's really strange that things got quiet when you saw all that activity up at Bartabunga going south along the mid-Atlantic ridge. Nothing there, but look to the south, going all the way down to the South Pole on both sides of Antarctica. Wouldn't it be weird if we saw an Antarctica earthquake? I mean, could happen. I don't know. I mean, will that happen over the next 7 days? I don't know. It's happening on both sides. That would be the first time I've ever issued a forecast for Antarctica. Watch out for it. Who knows? Maybe there will be. Keep an eye on it. But we would watch more north towards the South Sandwich Islands if there was going to be any large release. You know, if you were going to see like a 6 or a 7.0 earthquake, it would strike right here. But as I said, we're watching South America in this region, not this region. So if there is any earthquake development here, it should be relatively small compared to the other activity that's going on around the rest of the Pacific. Are there any other areas that I haven't really gone over? Okay, we've gone over Europe, we've gone over Asia. Russia, you're out of the mix. China, well, let's see. Let's take a look at China. Oh boy, you know, it's really hard to nail down China. They don't report their earthquakes. And since they don't report their earthquakes, we're not going to report on earthquakes for them. How about that? China, you guys should start reporting your earthquakes. How about that? There's no way you're not having earthquakes across China on a daily basis, at least on a 4.0 level. There's just no way. You're just not reporting them. What else? Oh, New Zealand. Okay, here's another area. You know, I'm glad I bothered to check this once over. New Zealand, we need to be on watch again. Now look at this. Last 7 days, nothing even over a 4.0 earthquake. Well, that pretty much says it. North Island and far South Island, both sides of the island, need to be on watch over the next 7 days for a 6.0. Maybe as low as a 5.5, maybe as high as a 6.1, 6.2, but I'm leaning towards that 6.0. Why? Activity to the north. Look at it. It's got to cause you some movement. You've been absent activity over the last 7 days. You always show earthquake activity when there's this much activity to your north, and it always strikes on both sides of the island, usually within succession of one another within a few days. So, if it's on the north side, you should see that 6.0. If it's on the south side, you should see that 5.0. Regardless of whether it's the 6 or the 5, should be on both sides, and it should be over the next 7 days. If I'm wrong, I'll issue a correction. Again, you've been silent for a week. Nothing large at all. It should be enough to shake you up, but not enough to cause super large damage like we saw in that 2011 Christchurch earthquake, which was just so strange to see that kind of damage off that moderate of an earthquake. But they said it was because of the Bay Area shape of the area. I'll have to take their word for it. Really weird that our FEMA officials were there that day meeting with the officials from Christchurch. I just think that's too weird. Guys, much love. Always have an earthquake plan ready and be prepared, just in case. You may never have to use it, but in times where you do need it, it'll save your life. So have a plan and be prepared. Don't be scared. Be prepared. File the plan away in the back of your mind what you'll do if an earthquake strikes. Okay? Food, water, transportation, communications, just the basics for your kids, pets, friends, loved ones, family, co-workers, employees. Just think about the people around you and what you need to prepare for in times of emergency. It's always a good idea. Be safe.